I'd like to take you, class, on a little journey into a close reading of a short poem that I admire very much by a writer I admire very much, San Sepulcro by Jory Graham. The first thing to be said about doing close readings is that I am embedding my own imagination into the language and therefore the imagination of the poet herself. And so there is an interaction going on. There's a there's an exchange between the writer and the writer and the poem and the reader of the poem. And that kind of tripartite exchange is what keeps me reading poetry after lots of decades. So let's look at this poem, which happens to be her first poem in her second book called Erosion. And as you know from what I've posted in the class, this poem is based on a painting by Piero della Francesca. And the painting's called, the 15th century painter, Italian painter. The painting's called Madonna del Parto. And this kind of information can greatly expand our understanding of a poem and really get us integrated into the poem's life. But it is not necessary to know anything about this painting when I'm reading this poem the first time, or the second, or the fifth, or the 20th. I didn't know about this painting till much later than when I first found this book. I found the book, and I know that I found the book at this date because I wrote it in the book. March of '88, I bought it in Boulder, Colorado. It's very meaningful to me to still have this artifact that is the book with my handprints all over it from all those years. The page is falling out. It's mine. And that's something that I really treasure in the value of books themselves. So let's look at this poem first as someone who knows nothing about Piero della Francesca, or that this poem is based on the painting of the Virgin Mary about to go into childbirth. So a religious slash historical painting. And let's think of the poem just in terms of music. So I'm going to do two close readings, basically. One just based on the music of the poem, which I can always do with every poem, regardless how difficult it becomes to me. And then a second reading that's a little more involved. What really interests me about, I shouldn't use the word involved, because the musicality of a poem is very involved. What I mean by that is I'd like to expand my understanding of the poem based on the material that Jory Graham has already conveyed to me concerning this painting. What really intrigues me and energizes me still about Jory Graham is the way that she blurs the lines between the material, which is also the historical world, and the spirit world, the mystery, the abstract soul world. And those two things are brought into constant interrelation and interaction in her poetry, such that it's difficult for me to separate them, which is true to life, isn't it? My body and my soul, I have a hard time separating them if I'm an integrated person. So I want to put that idea out there from the start. And to me, musicality in poetry, the alphabet of sounds in poetry by Mary Oliver, the way that language works as almost a musical variation on idea, that is so dramatically important to me that I can't overstate the argument that I really want to make, which is that you need nothing besides your imagination to first engage in a poem on a musical basis. Through the alphabet of sounds, through some of the concepts we're talking about in the class. So let's go. San Sepulcro. Already, the sound of those two words together is very musical to me because of the repetition of the S sound at the beginnings of those words, which is called sibilance, and we don't want to overdo it. That's the thing that when you see singers singing in a studio somewhere, they put that foam fitting over their microphone so that the singer, or something that blocks something else that blocks the S sound, so that the singer doesn't provide sibilance into the recording. Those two S sounds, though, are only as interesting as what else is in the words. And in this case, the K sound of Sepulcro jumps out at me. And when we're looking at sounds, we're looking at the way they sound, not the way they're spelled. C has a hard and a soft C sound. The hard C sound is K. The K and the S are in diametrical opposition to each other, and therefore, musically, there's already tension, and I haven't even got past the title. When I embed my imagination in the language, these are the things that I can notice. So my question to you, a rhetorical question for you to think about on your own, is how many things can I observe sonically in a poem? I mean, this poem is only, how many stanzas? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and a half stanzas, 6-line stanzas with 3 lines at the end. So how many things can I observe? First line, in this blue light, I can take you there. Snow having made me a world of bone seen through to. Let's stop there. It's not quite the end of the stanza, but that's the first sentence. And sentences and lines are in tension in poetry all the time. And we don't want to let the sentences override our lines in poetry. I think quite the opposite. We want our lines to have first place in our poems. In this blue light sets up a visual background for me. It's a super simple line, but light is a complicated idea, right? I can't see without light, and she can't take me there without light. But also in this stanza is a very interesting idea that starts to form, and I don't want to dwell on this yet, but the you of the poem is, as she says in the recording that you've listened to, it's her, it's the writer. So the question becomes, who is the I? So in this blue light with its long I sound, light, I, there's a repetition there, can take you there, and that I and that you sonically are again in tension, kind of the way that the S of San Sepulcro and the K of San Sepulcro are in tension too. Snow having made me a world of bone seen through to. Strange syntax, seen through to. Musically and rhythmically, it's very different than a world of bone. You could see me. Wait, I can take you there. Snow having made me a world of bone, it sees through. It would be very different. Instead, we get this rhythm of one metric rhythmic pulse with seen and then through and then to, and that kind of seen through to, that kind of doomsday roll of drum is very articulate in that it calls so much attention to itself. It makes me think that something dramatically important is happening. And there's a seeing through. The way snow sometimes lets you see through it when it's snowing. World of bone, the physical world. This is my house. Again, simple. So this stanza begins simply in this blue light and ends simply, this is my house, comma, followed by the next stanza. My section of Etruscan wall, my neighbor's lemon trees. And now she's painting a portrait for me. So section, Etruscan, the in sound of those two words makes for a kind of rhyming, an off rhyming, we should call it. Section, Etruscan, while my neighbor's lemon trees, and just below the lower church. So look at all those L sounds, lemon trees, below, lower. So when a consonant is repeated at the beginnings of the word, we call that alliteration, which some of you may have heard of. And we also call the repetition of consonant sounds at the beginning of words and in the middle or somewhere else in the word, like blueberry, B of blue, B of berry in the same word. We call that consonance, consonance, consonants. Sounds just like the not vowel sounds in our language. And that, if we extend it a little bit and not be too picky, lemon trees and below can be seen as an example of consonants with the L sounds, even though they're not in the same word. So close approximation of sound is what we're looking for in our poems to create music. Lemon trees, below, lower church, then airplane, factory. There's a K sound again. K sounds, as the alphabet of sounds shows us from Mary Oliver, the K sound is a mute, what's called a mute sound, and there are 8 of them in the English language, and those 8 are really interesting, and I think I've already talked about them a little bit in relation to profanity. Profane words contain a lot of K sounds in them. If we think about the mute sounds, B, D, P, Q, T, what am I missing here? There's one that I'm now starting to talk about. Yeah, K. Those sounds, and there are a couple others, those sounds are very textured. So we want our poems to have texture, and this poem has a lot of sonic texture, even without going too much into the meaning of this poem yet. I'm starting to glean the effects of the poem through sounds. An airplane, factory, period. Factory is a strange word in relation to the sort of lyric beauty of Etruscan, a world of bone seen through to, church. Factory seems too industrial. Same with airplane, kind of. But airplane sounds more soothing as a word, versus factory sounds very information driven to me. A rooster crows, next stanza, crows all day from mist. And we might ask ourselves, why does she make these lines in the shape that they are, and why are there stanza breaks where they are happening, right? It creates enjambment, to use another word that we need to know. A rooster crows all day from mist outside the walls. There's milk on the air. Mist, milk. There's the K sound again. Factory. The K sound that we talked about from San Sepulcro. There's milk, which is reminiscent of snow and also of childbirth. On the air, as if the world is being born, maybe. ice on the oily lemon skins. So we got lemon trees in the second stanza, and now we have lemon skins in the third period. How clean, K, clean the mind is. I was thinking about a line the other day. I'm not going to remember it now. Uh, um, oh, the mind of winter. It is the mind of winter in a Wallace Stevens poem. And Jory Graham is very influenced and affected by Wallace Stevens. How clean the mind is, holy grave. Those two words, there's a lot of tension between them in my reading of this. Similar to the other tensions I've talked about. Holy grave. Holy seems eternal as a word. I know it's not, but it conveys an eternality that grave seems the exact opposite. And also grave has multiple meanings, and shadow meanings come through in my sonic interpretation of any given poem. Grave, the gravestone, the grave site, but also it's grave, they say in French all the time. Ce n'est pas grave. It's not anything to worry about. Don't worry, it's not that bad. And we have that word too, although we don't use it very often. He has a grave demeanor. Then the G of grave and the G of girl. So is she grave? By Piero della Francesca with a K. Unbuttoning her blue dress, B of blue, B of buttoning, her mantle, blue, L, mantle, of weather, to go into, and weather has two meanings, to go into. L sounds are what are called in the alphabet of sounds liquid sounds. So L, M, N, R, there are four of them, and they create a liquidy, effulgent, is that a word? River, kind of a running river sound in our poems, and they should be used when they are effective for doing that kind of thing, when it makes sense according to the poem. When I'm writing my poem, and I bet you anything, when Jory Graham was writing her poem, the many, many drafts she went through, in the first draft, she didn't think about sound. She only created, and she only became completely immersed and involved and in love with her poem. And later on, probably realized, oh yeah, there's a lot of liquid sounds. Labor, L, come, we can go in. We can go in. It is before the birth of God. No one has risen yet to the museums, to the assembly line, bodies and wings. And here's where the poem's really becoming blurred in terms of the physical and the spiritual, the physical and the non-physical, the material and the other. To the open air market, this is what the living do. Go in. It's a long way. And the dress keeps opening from eternity to privacy. And notice the off rhyme, which is also called near rhyme or slant rhyme of those words. Eternity, privacy, quickening, period. Inside, at the heart, is tragedy. The present moment forever stillborn, but going in. The word stillborn to me calls a lot of attention to itself in a way that the word factory does also. They seem of a different lexicon of this poem, completely unlyrical, and their intention with all the lyrical language going on around eternity, privacy, the open air market, the present moment forever stillborn is like a dissonant note in a song. Very, very specifically placed there. But going in, each breath is a button coming undone. Something terribly nimble-fingered, finding all the stops. Beautiful rhythm at the end. Nimble-fingered, finding all the stops. Iambic pentameter right there. Nimble-fingered, finding all the stops. I think it's 9 syllables. We want 10 for, we've been conditioned to want 10 syllables for iambic pentameter in those hundreds of thousands of iambic pentameter poems that were written prior to the 1920s. So let's do another reading. In this blue light, San Sepulcro, right? The town where Piero della Francesca lived for most of his life, Jory Graham tells us. It's where the Piero della Francesca Museum is now. And then we have the painting. The painting, however, is not in San Sepulcro. It's in a nearby town called Montecai. I'm not sure how to say it. She says it in the video. Montecai, Italy. Not that that's important, really, but it is interesting that this hugely important painting for Western civilization is not in the town where the man who painted it lived. It's 30 minutes away. And in the painting, we have the Virgin Mary about to give birth, unbuttoning her dress, as the angels, the 2 angels aiding her, are pulling the curtains back so she will not be revealed to us, so we cannot see the birth of Jesus, the Christ, who people often refer to as God, as Joy Graham does here. And I never know what to make of that exactly. I guess I have a little bit of an argument with that, in that Christ in literature and in biblical texts and in biblical text was the right hand of God, and so they were separate entities who were brought in conjunction. So, but that's from a non-Christian perspective, which is my reading stance on this poem and the Bible and all kinds of great Christian literature that I've read for many years. So in this blue light, blue like her dress, of course, I cannot miss that. I can take you there. Who is the I? Is the I God? But if it is God, then why is Graham referring to the birth of God in the 5th stanza? Who is this I? The imagination of Joy Graham as a separate entity from Joy Graham, who is the you in the poem. It's lovely, though, isn't it? How Graham wants her poem to take her into what she cannot and we cannot see due to those angelic figures closing the drapes right after this painting's done. So it's kind of a, I haven't thought of this before, and this is what close reading does for me. It's kind of an eavesdropping poem. And eavesdropping on the moment in world history in which everything's about to change. In the next 12 hours or 1 hour, I mean, it's an immaculate conception. It's an immaculate birth. It can happen in a moment. And I don't remember what the Bible says about that. This event is going to transform the history of civilization, both East and West, for bad or for good or for ill, forever. And so when we're writing our poems, what are we writing about? Is it only about me? Or is it about my time in history? Or is it about my consciousness in relation to a world event that altered everything going forward? Which is a really deep, deep idea. Do we include enough history in our poems? Louise Glick often has Greek cultural figures in her poems. Joy Graham speaks a lot about history. She has an amazing poem called The Taking Down God. And it's in a book called, I think it's called Never. I think it's from the book called Never. An incredible poem. She also has one about the assassination of JFK, and I can't remember what that one's called, but if you're interested, you could find it easily online by just searching. So I can take you there. It seems so simple in this blue light, but it really gets complicated if you think about who this you is. Snow having made me, the I, a world of bone seen through too. It seems more and more that I is the spirit behind the material world. Snow having made me, the spirit, a world of bone. You, Joy Graham, you, the reader, you, the historical figures living through your time, your very brief time here. You can see me suddenly, right? That's all really interesting to me. This is my house, my section of Etruscan wall, my neighbor's lemon trees. So it seems that in the second sentence, or the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, well, so how to count lines when they're variegated like this. So the first line is, in this blue light, I can take you there. And there's a whole history behind what she's doing here. For instance, in the poetry of Chaucer, at the time of Chaucer, so we're talking 13th century, or maybe it's 14th, I forget, there was a caesura in the center of each 4-beat line. And a caesura is a pause, a natural pause, two beats, two pause, 2 other beats, and they are corresponding across this caesura. Caesura is also the word that gives us C-section. So in childbirth, and that's where that comes from. So in poetry, we've customarily, traditionally, had a pause in the center of the lines, which I think Joy Graham is playing with here in a very interesting way in this blue light. I can take you there. Second line, snow having made me a world of bone, seen through to period, a very different pause now. This, and then after that period, it's like the period announces a new form here. Reader, be aware, I'm doing something different now. I'm smart and I know my poetry history, so don't accuse me of, throwing this at the end of a line for no reason. I'm alerting you to the fact that I'm changing up, and me, the I is now me, the speaker of the poem, the woman, and we sometimes equate her with the writer, which is an obvious, difficult proposition to get away with at any time, unless I know the writer, but people do it all the time. So I equate her, this my house, with you. I can take you there. And then boom, this is my house, my section of Etruscan wall. Enjambment, Etruscan wall. I don't read my section of Etruscan wall, my neighbors, lemon trees, and just below, right? I read naturally my section of Etruscan wall, my neighbor's lemon trees. And therefore, as I'm reading and seeing the page, I am visually getting something different than what I'm getting sonically. So my sonic reading at the beginning is the foundation. My visual reading happens in relation to the historical personage of the Virgin Mary and the angels, the birth of Christ, the Etruscan wall, the things in the poem, the lemon trees, the church, the airplane factory, a rooster. And that word factory makes me now think, what time period are we in? Is this World War II? Is there something going on? I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there. Factory being such an odd word, my mind doesn't want to let go of it. A rooster crows all day from mist outside the walls. There's milk on the air, the milk of the mother, the milk of the ice, the milk of the snow. There's a lot happening on the air, which I would miss if I'm just reading this as, crows out all day from mist outside the walls. There's milk on the air, ice on the oily lemon skins. How clean the mind is, right? I need to read poems slowly. Oily is very close to holy, by the way. I just understood that as I was reading that fast. So maybe it behooves us to read at different paces. How clean the mind is, holy grave. Such a somber tone. So one of the reasons why I believe, or I think, I shouldn't say believe, that she, Joy Graham, the writer, is making a clear distinction between stanzas here is change in tone. How clean the mind is. Boom, holy grave. Is this girl by Piero della Francesca unbuttoning her blue dress? To call the Virgin Mary a girl is a strange proposition. I'm not sure what to think of that. I mean, it sure makes it quotidian, right? Like she's an ordinary woman, ordinary girl. By Piero della Francesca, unbuttoning her blue dress. Oh, the musicality of Piero della Francesca. I didn't even mention that before. That's incredible. I mean, imagine having that for a name. Everyone would fall in love with you everywhere you went and introduce yourself. her mantle of weather. Now we have a connection between the blue of the dress, the blue of her facial expression. What is that facial expression? The angel on the left looks like is wearing an exalting sort of expression. The angel on the right to me looks sort of blank. Mary looks, what does she look? She has the face of someone who is grave, as I mentioned earlier. There's gravity in her face, as if she knows, well, she must know, in an immaculate conception, with Gabriel having come to her and informed her that she's giving birth to the Christ. It is this girl by Piero della Francesca, unbuttoning her blue dress, her mantle of weather to go into labor. Seen through to, go into. So correspondences between stanzas start to hearken out to me as I get to know the poem better. Labor, factory, labor, childbirth, cesarean section, which of course is not going to happen. But all of this is informative in relation to the poem's, I don't know what to say. The poem's historical background, the poem's backdrop, its background, its mural of events that are happening all in a very short period of time. Come, we, you and me, reader, you, the you in the first first line, and you, the you that's the reader now, which is always, the reader is always incorporated into YOU in a poem. Come, we can go in. It is before the birth of God. Again, very simple lines, very simple language. But look how weighty. There's magnitude in these lines. No one has risen yet to the museums, to the assembly line. Assembly line, factory, labor, bodies and wings. Bodies as material, wings as spiritual. I can't think of the word wings in a poetic context without thinking of Ode to the Nightingale by John Keats, where the writer, where the speaker of the poem is looking out at the trees at Hampstead Heath and sees a nightingale in the trees and sees the nightingale suddenly fly and follows, puts his imagination inside the bird and writes the poem from the speaker's perspective, but then he becomes the bird and flies with the bird where there is no death, where verses where youth grows pale and spectre thin and dies in the material world. In the spirit world, or the world of bird flight, there is no death, where there is an eternal aspect. And if you haven't read that poem, do yourself a favor and run now. Stop listening to me. Go and find that poem at poetryfoundation.org. This is what the living do. Go in. It is a long way. There's responsibility. There is a life here that's happening that's going to alter consciousness. And the dress keeps opening from eternity to privacy. Eternity is what we see in the painting. Privacy is the next painting, which is only the curtain closed and the Virgin Mary giving birth. Quickening inside at the heart, and here she goes way beyond the curtain, is tragedy. Of course, the crucifixion is 33 years away, right? The blood of Christ, the tragedy of the death, the tragedy of birth. Tragedy of death is born in the experience of birth for all of us. And Graham states it so succinctly. Inside, at the heart, at the very core, is tragedy, the present moment, forever stillborn. Ugh. My heart sort of just stops right there. Forever stillborn. As if in birth, we're all birthed. Those of us who made it through that, we're all stillborn. Nonetheless, even if we weren't born stillborn, we're stillborn because in my cells is my death. And hell, it's a blink, right? 2 days ago, I was 23. I'm 60. It feels like no time has gone and all these experiences accrued. So in my birth is my death. That's a paraphrase of a T.S. Eliot line from the Four Quartets. Is tragedy the moment forever stillborn, but going in each breath. Life is a button coming undone. Now we're back to before she gives birth. Outside the curtain, something terribly nimble-fingered, finding all of the stops. Terribly, I can't think of this word without thinking of, am I going to be able to name it? William Butler Yeats's poem is great, great poem. A Terrible Beauty is Born, Easter 1916. And then this musicality that ends the poem is so effective and so beautiful, but then the poem stops on this mute sound of P, stop, with an S added, a mute sound of S. So we have two mute sounds at the end. And, no, that's not right. I'm sorry. S is not a mute sound, just P. And the musicality gives me some kind of hope after the sort of awful moment of stillborn. So look, there's all this going on in a poem. Will I let myself see it, hear it, or will I hurry through it and miss it?